3 years ago, Boeing rolled the last 747 out of its factory in Everett, Washington. The workers lined up, some of them cried. 54 years of production, over 1,500 aircraft, and just like that, it was over. The industry had made its verdict. Jumbo jets were finished. Too big, too thirsty, too expensive to operate. Airlines couldn't retire them fast enough. Commentators called it the natural end of an era. And honestly, the numbers backed them up. So why, in 2026, are some of the most powerful airlines in the world quietly pressuring Boeing to build something even larger? This isn't nostalgia. This isn't sentiment. This is a story about one airport, one airline, one man, and a decision that could reshape the future of commercial aviation in ways nobody saw coming. But before we get to what's being proposed right now, you need to understand how we got here. Because the death of the jumbo jet wasn't an accident. It was a calculated killing, and the weapon used was math. The RISC when the Boeing 747 entered service with Pan Am in 1970. It didn't just change aviation, it changed who aviation was for. Before the jumbo jet, flying long distances was expensive, uncomfortable, and largely reserved for people who could afford it. The 747 broke that. More seats per flight meant lower cost per passenger. Lower cost per passenger meant more people could fly. It was elegant in its simplicity, and it worked for decades. Boeing delivered over 1,500 747s across all its variants. The 747-400, introduced in 1989, became the most commercially successful version to 694 aircraft delivered. Operating on the highest density routes connecting the world's biggest cities, for a long time, if you were flying from London to New York or Sydney to Los Angeles, there was a good chance you were sitting inside one of these machines. Airlines built entire business models around them. Hub-and-spoke networks flourished. The logic was straightforward. Fill a giant plane between two major hubs, then distribute passengers onward with smaller regional aircraft. It was efficient. It was profitable. And for a while, it seemed like the natural shape of global aviation forever. But something was changing underneath the surface, and most people didn't notice until it was already too late for the jumbo jet. The killing Belo de Butha threat didn't come from a recession or a war or a pandemic. It came from engineering. Specifically, it came from twin-engine jets getting very, very good at something they were never supposed to be able to do. For most of aviation history, flying across oceans required at least 3 or 4 engines. The logic was straightforward. If one engine failed over the middle of the Pacific, you needed others to keep you airborne long enough to reach land. Twin-engine jets were simply considered too risky for those routes. That restriction kept jumbo jets safe. Then came ETOPS, Extended Twin-Engine Operational Performance Standards. It sounds bureaucratic, because it is. But what it meant in practice was this. Regulators began certifying twin-engine aircraft to fly routes that took them hours away from the nearest suitable airport on a single engine. First 120 minutes, then 180, eventually further still. The final wall protecting the jumbo jet from competition had been quietly dismantled by a regulatory committee most passengers had never heard of. And once that wall came down, the economics became brutal. The Boeing 777 and the 787 Dreamliner could fly the same routes as the 747 with 2 engines instead of 4. Fuel efficiency improved by around 20%. Per seat, compared to the 747-400, maintenance costs dropped significantly. You had half the engines to service, half the complexity to manage, and airlines could fly point-to-point between smaller cities. Without needing a massive hub at either end, airlines didn't sentimental about it. They ran the numbers, and the numbers told them to move on. Orders dried up. Retirements accelerated. By the time Boeing delivered that final 747 in 2023, most of the industry had already moved on mentally years before. The jumbo jet era was over. Everyone agreed, almost everyone, the one airline that never aged either is one place in the world where the death of the jumbo jet simply does not make sense. And that place is Dubai. Emirates Airline operates 116 Airbus A380s, the largest passenger aircraft currently in service, all from a single hub at Dubai International Airport. That airport handles approximately 90 million passengers per year. And here's the problem that changes everything. It is nearly full. Dubai International cannot easily expand. It is hemmed in by the city around it. The number of available runway slots is effectively capped. Emirates cannot solve its growth problem by adding more flights. The airspace and the tarmac won't allow it. The only lever left to pull is the one that the rest of the industry abandoned. Put more passengers on each individual aircraft. This is not a theoretical constraint. This is the central strategic reality of one of the most powerful airlines on the planet. And the man who has been living inside that reality for over a decade is Sir Tim Clark. Emirates President Clark has been arguing for a new generation of ultra-large aircraft longer than most airline executives have been in their current roles. He pushed Airbus for an A380neo, updated engines, better efficiency, a path forward for the giant aircraft. Airbus ran the numbers and declined without a substantial financial commitment from Emirates to underwrite the development. Clark then pushed for a full of 380 replacement. Airbus estimated the development cost at around $20 billion. That conversation went nowhere. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable because Emirates didn't give up. They just changed who they were asking. The $96 billion BTN Aviation. The way you signal that you are serious is with an order book. Emirates placed one of the largest aircraft orders in history, minus 205 Boeing 777X aircraft across multiple variants, valued at approximately $96 billion at list prices. That is not a casual purchase. That is a statement. That is Emirates telling Boeing, "We are your most important customer, and we need you to keep listening to us." And at the Dubai Air Show in November 2025, Emirates escalated. The airline announced its backing for a feasibility study into something that had never been built before, the Boeing 777-10, a stretched version of the 777X family that would become the largest twin-engine wide-body aircraft ever constructed. Industry analysts estimate it would seat somewhere between 470 and 490 passengers in a typical three-class layout. That would make it competitive with the A380 in terms of raw capacity, but powered by just two engines. On paper, it sounds like the perfect solution. The engineering logic is there. The market logic, at least for Emirates, is undeniable. Boeing hasn't said yes, but they haven't walked away either. And that ambiguity is exactly where things get complicated, because there is a problem sitting in the middle of this story that nobody in the press releases is talking about directly. The 777-10 would be a stretched variant of the 777-9. That seems straightforward enough. Except the 777-9, the aircraft it would be based on, does not yet have its certification from the FAA, the 777X. Program launched in 2013, entry into service was originally projected for 2020. Boeing is now targeting 2027 for 777-9 certification. During that time, the program has accumulated over $15 billion in pre-tax charges. Completed aircraft are sitting in storage at Boeing's facility in Everett, fully built, generating no revenue, waiting for regulatory approval that keeps getting pushed back. The FAA identified structural concerns with the thrust links connecting the engines to the wings. Boeing suspended portions of flight testing in 2024 to address them, and the broader regulatory environment has shifted permanently following the 737 MAX disasters. The FAA is not in a hurry. It is not going to be rushed. Every technical finding is documented, reviewed, and resolved before the next step is approved. That is how it should work. But it means timelines are long and unpredictable in ways they weren't a decade ago. So Boeing is being asked seriously by a major customer to begin a feasibility study for a larger, heavier, aerodynamically distinct variant of an aircraft that they haven't yet proven they can certify in its current form. The 777-10 would require its own separate certification process. A stretched fuselage changes weight distribution, structural loading, aerodynamic behavior at the margins. Boeing would need to conduct ultimate load testing, stress the airframe to 150% of its design limits, and demonstrate that every passenger can evacuate within 90 seconds, a harder task when you're carrying nearly 500 people. The gap between the feasibility study and a flying aircraft is measured in years and billions of dollars that Boeing does not currently have spare. The collision is where the timeline becomes a problem that cannot be ignored. A mere fleet of A380s is not going to fly forever. Based on typical commercial aircraft service lives, the carrier will need to start replacing those jets within 10 to 15 years. That window is not as generous as it sounds when you account for the time required to design, certify, and manufacture a new aircraft variant at scale. The clock is already running. Emirates knows it. Boeing knows it. But the rest of the industry is not waiting around for this conversation. American Airlines, United, Delta, none of the major U.S. carriers have ordered 777X aircraft.